The village of San Lucas was a small, seemingly insignificant place tucked away in the quiet hills of Central America. Its cobblestone streets wound through lush, vibrant greenery, and the air was thick with the sweet scent of wildflowers and pine trees. Life moved slowly in San Lucas. The mornings were filled with the soft chirps of songbirds, and the evenings were bathed in the warm glow of a sun setting over the hills. For the residents of the village, each day passed with the same rhythm, and everyone knew one another. It was a town untouched by time. But like most small towns, there were things that went unspoken. There were rumors of strange disappearances, whispers about people who never returned, and stories of those who seemed to vanish into the very land that surrounded them. The villagers had long learned to keep their heads down and their mouths shut, not questioning the things that were better left alone. John had been living in San Lucas for nearly 2 years. A retired accountant from the bustling city, he had come to the village to escape the noise, the pressure, and the frenetic pace of urban life. He found solace in the simplicity of the village. He had a modest home near the edge of town and spent most of his time reading, tending to his garden, and going on walks with his dog, Xena. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. Xena was no ordinary dog. She had served as a K-9 unit for the local police force in the city for several years before an injury to her leg forced her early retirement. Despite her injury, Xena was still agile and alert, her senses sharp as ever. She had been John's companion for nearly a year, and together they had forged a bond that was unbreakable. John found comfort in her presence, and Xena seemed to find peace in their quiet walks through the dense forest that bordered the village. It was during one of these walks that Xena's instinct would lead them down a path neither of them expected. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. John and Xena had ventured deeper into the woods than usual, following a narrow trail that wound around towering oak trees and thick underbrush. The air was warm and heavy with humidity, but there was a certain stillness that hung in the air, a silence that seemed out of place. John had always loved the tranquility of the forest, but today something felt different. Xena's behavior had shifted. Xena was usually calm and composed, never one to get easily excited, but today she was on edge. Her ears were perked, her eyes darting from side to side, and her nostrils flared as if she were trying to catch an unfamiliar scent. John slowed his pace, sensing her unease. "Xena, what's going on?" John murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Xena stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. She stood completely still for a moment, her body rigid, before her deep bark shattered the stillness of the forest. It was a bark unlike any John had ever heard from her, sharp, insistent, almost frantic. "Xena?" John called softly, his heart beginning to race as he turned to follow her gaze. There was nothing unusual in the direction she was staring, just the dense forest stretching out before them, but Xena's reaction told him otherwise. The dog's barking grew louder, more urgent. John approached her cautiously, calling her name again, trying to calm her. But Xena remained fixated on a large oak tree at the edge of the forest, her eyes never leaving it. She began to bark even louder, her tail stiff and held high, her stance full of tension. Something was wrong. John could feel it in his bones. John reached out to grab her collar, hoping to redirect her attention, but as his hand touched her fur, something unexpected happened. Xena yelped and pulled away, darting several feet away from him. Her bark became more frantic, and her body trembled as if in fear. "What is it, girl?" John asked, now thoroughly alarmed. He followed her gaze toward the oak tree. The tree looked ordinary at first glance, old and gnarled, with bark that was rough and weathered by years of age. But as John approached, he noticed something strange. There was a slight movement near the base of the tree, something almost imperceptible, as if the tree itself were shifting, groaning under some unseen weight. It was subtle, but it was there, and it sent a chill down John's spine. Xena's barking had grown louder, more insistent, as she paced back and forth, clearly agitated. John was starting to feel uneasy. What could possibly be causing Xena to react this way? What had she sensed that he could not? Taking a deep breath, John moved closer to the tree, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of danger. He had walked through this forest countless times, and there had never been anything to worry about. But today felt different, as though the land itself was hiding something. As he knelt down beside the tree, his hand brushed against the bark, feeling the rough texture beneath his fingers. He looked around again, half expecting something to jump out from the shadows, but there was nothing. The forest was eerily quiet. Then, Sina's barking stopped suddenly, and John could hear the distinct sound of her paws scratching against the ground. He turned to see her digging furiously at the base of the tree, her teeth bared as if trying to unearth something hidden beneath the roots. Without thinking, John stepped forward and grabbed her collar, pulling her away from the tree. "Easy, girl," he said, his voice calming, but his mind was racing. What was she digging at? What could be buried there? John knelt down to investigate, brushing aside the leaves and dirt that had been disturbed by Sina's digging. As he did, his fingers brushed against something hard, something cold and metallic. He froze. What could it be? He cleared away more dirt, revealing what appeared to be a small metal box, its surface covered in dirt and grime. The box was old, its edges rusted, and it looked like it had been buried there for years. With trembling hands, John pulled the box from the earth, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sina, what did you find?" he murmured. Sina sat beside him, panting, still watching the box intently. John hesitated for a moment, staring at the strange object in his hands. There was something about it that felt wrong, but his curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he opened the box. Inside, he found a small bundle of cloth carefully folded. John's breath caught in his throat as he unfolded it. Beneath the cloth was something he had not expected: a police uniform. The shirt was dark blue, with a badge pinned to the chest. The pants were neatly folded, and there were boots scuffed from use but still sturdy. But what made John's heart race was the name tag sewn into the shirt. It read Corporal Mike. Corporal Mike. The name was familiar to John. He had heard it whispered among the villagers, rumors about the officer who had disappeared years ago. Mike had been a good cop, known for his dedication to justice, but he had vanished without a trace one fateful night. No one knew what happened to him, and the case was quickly closed. John's hands trembled as he carefully examined the uniform. He had no doubt now that this was the same Corporal Mike who had disappeared all those years ago. But why was his uniform buried in the forest? And why had Gina led him here? His mind raced with questions, but before he could think any further, he heard footsteps approaching. Someone was coming. John quickly stuffed the uniform and the metal box back into his backpack, hiding it beneath his jacket. The last thing he needed was for someone to see what he had found. A figure emerged from the trees, a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a worn-out shirt and jeans. It was Luis, one of the villagers. "John, you all right?" Luis asked, eyeing Zena, who was now sitting calmly beside him. "I'm fine," John replied, trying to sound casual. "Just taking a walk. Nothing to worry about." Luis nodded, though his eyes narrowed slightly as if he could sense something was off. "You've been out here for a while. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just fine," John said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired, that's all." Luis gave him a long look, but then shrugged. "All right, take care, John." As Luis walked away, John let out a sigh of relief. His heart was still racing, but he knew that he couldn't let this go. There was a mystery here, one that was tied to Corporal Mike's disappearance, and he had to uncover the truth. But where to start? Later that evening, John sat at his kitchen table, the uniform spread out before him. His mind was spinning with the possibilities, but one thing was certain: Sina had led him to something important, something buried for years, something that had been hidden, perhaps for a reason. The next morning, John decided to visit the local police station. He needed answers. He had to know what had happened to Corporal Mike and why his uniform was buried in the forest. He entered the small, dimly lit station where a few officers were, chatting at the counter. The chief, Thomas, was standing by the window, looking out at the village square. Tomas had always been a quiet man, but John couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. "Good morning, Chief," John said, trying to sound casual. Thomas turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Morning, John. How's Xena?" "She's doing fine," John replied, glancing down at his dog, who was sitting at his feet. "Listen, Chief, I've got a question." "What is it?" "I found something strange out in the forest." Tomas raised an eyebrow. "What did you find?" John hesitated for a moment, trying to decide how much to reveal. "I found a police uniform. It belonged to Corporal Mike." Tomas's face went pale. His eyes widened, and he stepped forward quickly, lowering his voice. "Where did you find this?" "In the woods near the old oak tree." Tomas looked around nervously, then motioned for John to follow him into a back office. Once they were alone, Thomas spoke in a low voice. "Listen, John, there are things you don't know about Mike's disappearance. Things that the town doesn't talk about. He was involved in something dangerous. something no one wanted to get caught up in. John felt his pulse quicken. "What are you talking about?" Tomas sighed deeply. Mike was investigating a case that went higher than any of us expected. The millionaire who owns the land around the village, he's not who he seems. He's been running a racket, laundering money, bribing officials, and even using the police force to cover his tracks. Mike was digging into it, and he paid the price for it. John stared at him in shock. "You're saying Mike was killed because he was investigating this millionaire?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think that uniform you found, it's a sign. Mike was trying to expose something, but someone made sure he didn't get the chance." John's mind was reeling. He hadn't expected this, not in a million years. Mike had been a good cop, a man who had stood up for what was right. But now it seemed his death was tied to a larger conspiracy, and the more John learned, the more he realized that the truth was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined.